Okay, so it's time to run through the Woodland Realms as a faction. Now, before we get into it, they are a derivative of the Sylvan Elves. They were split off from them. Both of them have had their rosters padded out a little bit with new units to compensate for the fact that the Sylvan Elves didn't really have the biggest roster to begin with, so splitting off a faction from them would have made both subsequent factions rather small. This is still kind of the case. Their roster isn't fully ready yet, but nonetheless it's still something worth showing in its current state. So let's get right on into it. So with the Woodland Realms you will notice quite a lot of similarities with the Sylvan Elves and apparently some frame drop. Interesting. Hopefully that'll clear up. Regardless, the Woodland Realms, obviously the Cinderblade Masters, they are still dangerous in the newest patch. They don't have hit points now, but they are still very, very deadly in terms of attack. And also it does fit with the new, particularly the Sylvan Elves and the Woodland Realms, mobility and moving around with your speed is going to be very important. Taking engagements head on is not a particularly good idea with the Elves anymore. It's going to be pretty difficult to play them correctly, I feel. Maybe a little too difficult if the change is as extreme as I think it's going to be. But nonetheless, the Elves still have very good individual units. The Cinderblade Masters probably not as overpowered as they were in the last patch, but still very, very dangerous in the right situation. They'll cut through low tier units very, very quickly indeed. Then we have the Mirkwood Militia. Now I believe the idea behind this is to have a lower tier version of certain units, or because Militia usually implies that, but from the looks of them, they're going to be a sword and shield variant of the other units that have the same sort of uniform. They look very, very cool. They're not going to be quite as powerful as the spears or the two-handed swordsmen, simply because there are more of them in the unit. You can always glean that from this sort of thing. Having a unit that can fill out the roster is kind of important, although again, they're obviously not going to be as cheap as other militia. Far from it. These guys are probably more comparable to the mid-tier infantry of all the other factions, maybe even a little better. I'd compare them probably to the Quindi. At least that's the idea behind these guys, I believe. Still a very nice looking unit. Obviously all of these types of units, the new units that the Sylvan Elves got in the last patches essentially are now the Woodland Realms units. And then of course we have the Here and Ich. I think that's how you pronounce it, or Ek. You know, these guys are the spears, similar to the Sylvan Heavy Spearmen in many ways. You know, they are. I don't know how useful spears are going to be with the new need to be mobile from the elves. Potentially they can still hold down a small section of the map while they sort of split their army off to try and divide and conquer. But even so, I would suggest that these guys are very, very good at holding the line. They don't have, well, they do have pikes now, this faction, but the Elven Spears always performed similarly to pikes in terms of when they were in formation. They were very, very difficult to break down. That's not going to be any different here. Another existing unit from the last patch, the Lang version. Again, two-handed swords, similar to the Sylvan Heavy Swordsman and the Eldar Swordsman. Very good on the attack. Similar to the Cinderblade Masters. There are less of them though. They're slightly more survivable, I believe, at the cost of some lethality against lesser units, but again, very cool looking unit. And with the newfound focus on mobility, these guys are going to be very important, and not wasting them is going to be very, very important, because you're probably going to be using this unit, I would suggest, at least this or the Sylvan Heavy Swordsman. Another new unit is the Sylvan Patrol. Again, I believe the idea behind this is to give a slightly lower tier sort of spear unit. They have a scythe. They look pretty cool. Kind of like a spear variant of the Woodland Warriors, they look like, except with green armor obviously and a slightly different focus. They won't be focused around taking out armored units, but again, pretty good. There are only 57 of them in the unit, so again you can tell that you're never going to have the number advantage with these, well, I almost said Sylvan Elves and the Woodland Realms. Then we have the Elder Palace Guard, the most high tier infantry unit that they have. This might be where your general will go. Very, they were in the last patch as well. They are very high on hit points. They have 5. They perhaps aren't quite as durable as you would expect next to something like the dwarves, but they will still get the job done. Good against cavalry as well. Armor is probably where these guys will come unstuck though. So again, probably best to leave armored units to your range and deal with the lower tier units with your infantry, because they will trade very, very efficiently with them. And they have a pike unit, the Avari Elder Pikemen. So the Avari units have effectively been moved from Dale and into the Woodland realms. So they have taken their units from two sources, technically. Arguably the best pikes from the previous version. In terms of pikes, I would say they were definitely the best. If you added halberds to that, the Fountain Guard may have something to say about that, but still a very, very good pike unit. Again, with the focus on mobility, I can only see these guys being useful in the siege, whether on the defense or on the attack. Because, you know, pikes not known for their mobility. You really need to be in formation for them to be effective at all, and you can't be running around in formation. So again, I would, you know, the utility of these guys is going to be limited, especially in open battle, so you've got to use them sparingly, and they aren't cheap, naturally. None of the Sylvan Elves units are cheap. Moving on to the very extensive list of skirmishers that the Woodland Realms has. Again, the Sylvan Elves and the Woodland Realms very similar with regards to their skirmishers. Light Elven Archers, the lower tier. Not very durable at all, but they will do a lot of damage. It's worth saying as well that some of the higher tier Woodland Realms Archers will have sort of special ammunition that they can use, at least more effective special ammunition than other factions, so they will be able to leverage their skirmish as well, and their skirmishes are very fast, they can escape. Cavalry is still going to be a problem for them though, I can tell that right now. The cavalry is going to slaughter your archers unless you're on guard, which might be a bit of a glaring weakness in both the Woodland Realms and the Sylvan Elves, because even with your spears around, counteracting the lethal charges that cavalry has been given in this patch is going to be very, very difficult indeed. Woodland Sentinels, again, you might be able to shoot down cavalry before it approaches, but that's a game of chicken that often you're not going to win, I would have to say. Woodland Sentinels, again, a Heidi version, sort of a ranger tier unit. They're going to be pretty good at what they do, but pretty fragile. Glass cannons are what lightly armoured archers always end up being. Then we have the Elder Council. This is a javelin unit. They're pretty good in melee as well. You can always tell when a unit's pretty good in melee. They're like the gatekeepers of the javelin world, these guys. They're very, very tough to break down. Their javelins do lethal damage. They will absolutely mow down units with their javelins. Again, low range though. Cavalry is going to be the big weakness of these guys being charged. You really want to be using the javelins on these guys because they will allow your army to trade very efficiently, and that's what you really need as the elves. So I can see these guys being used a lot in their current form. I don't mind these javelins being very, very good as they are, because I think Woodland Realms sorely needs something of this killing potential in order to try and mitigate cavalry charges. Again, Avari Elder Archers, slightly more armoured. They were very, very good with Dale, but again, very expensive. That's a theme of the elves. That will never change. And then here is the Beng variant of this unit, the Archers. I've always loved this unit. I used this unit very effectively this one time, so I have fond memories of using it in the last patch. So again, an armoured variant, very similar to the Elder Enway Archers and the Sylvan Heavy Archers, that sort of tier. And then more archers, the Foresters of Haleth. Again, you know, all of these different types of archers give you a lot of options. Even when the cost increases, you're going to be able to get a different type of archer, which is very good. They can hide anywhere. Again, not very well armoured, but they will make up for it in terms of damage. And again, the Dower variant of this. So this again, it's like a ranger version of the Here units, the Hin-E Dower. Interesting. So again, lightly armoured, very, very damaging. All of the Sylvan skirmishers share that capability. And then the Elder units. We have the Elder Royal Guard, they have axes on their back. Very good in melee and at range. This is a unit that's very important. The Rangers may be very good at range, but as soon as the melee fight starts, they may struggle because of their lack of armour and survivability. These guys are a bit less so. Against sort of mid and lower tier infantry, they will still do the business. It will take a high tier infantry unit to really effectively dispatch these guys in a prolonged fight anyway. And then we have the even better variant, the Elder Royal Council. I can only imagine that in the final version these guys will still be the best archers. I think that is the idea behind them anyway. They are very, very strong indeed. Again, very good in melee. They may struggle against cavalry charges simply because of how lethal they are, but if you've got to really try and protect your high tier units, which is difficult because all of your units are technically high tier as the Woodland Realms. And then of course we have the Mighty Stags. We have the Elder Pathfinders, which is the melee variant. Again, shock cavalry, pretty good. They are pretty durable compared to a lot of other units, but again, there are less of them, so they're prone to being trapped and then picked off. So you've got to really keep these guys on the move like the rest of your army, very micro-intensive. And then we have the Elder King's Guard with 3 hit points, very durable individually, which is something that most cavalry is not now. So they do have that going for them, but there are only 16 of them, so the mass you're delivering, it will still be a lethal charge, but again, for every unit model you lose, it's a big loss to the unit overall, and your opponent is going to want to single these guys out. It's almost certainly where your general's going to be, and it's one of the most deadly units that you can field, and if left unattended, you will be able to wreck your opponents with this unit pretty effectively. And so that is the Woodland Realms, and essentially they are very, very similar to the Sylvan Elves. In terms of differences between the two factions, they are quite minor in terms of how you're going to play them, I think. If anything, I would suggest probably the Woodland Realms are better at the moment. I think the Sylvan Elves are probably going to need a few more units. I think the Sylvan Elves are focused a little bit more around the defense and their durability units, whereas the Woodland Realms are a bit more about lethality. And the lethality is what you need, because you're going to need to close that numbers gap pretty quickly. So the Woodland Realms, I think, are going to be a very potent faction on release of the next patch, and I think they will keep that. They'll keep that classification right up until final release. But that's fine. The elves, they're going to be difficult to play, I think, but if you master them, I think they're going to be very, very deadly indeed. So there's only one new faction to go through next, and that is Umbar, although I have been told that there are 3 new units coming for Umbar in a mini patch that's shortly going to be given, so I think I might hold off on that and just go through the new units from each existing faction first, and then we'll do Umbar after that when they have a bit more of their full roster in there. So I hope you'll join me for that.